The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Creek, Wyoming Territory. 1873. Clarabelle Mason stood at the general store window, watching the town wives gather in clusters like hens, their whispers sharp as winter wind. She knew what they called her when they thought she couldn't hear. Plain Clara, the spinster girl with mouse-brown hair and pallid skin that never seemed to catch the sun quite right. At 24, she was well past the marrying age in a frontier town where girls wed at 16. Her father had given up introducing her to potential suitors after the last one. A traveling merchant had taken one look at her and suddenly remembered urgent business in the next county. Her mother, worn thin by disappointment and shame, could barely meet her eyes anymore. Still mooning at the window, Clara, Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through her thoughts. The boarding house matron stood behind her, arms crossed. Best get to your chores. Those linens won't wash themselves. Clarabelle turned away, her worn boots scuffing against the floorboards. She'd been working at Henderson's boarding house for 3 years now, earning her keep with red, chapped hands and a permanently bent back from scrubbing floors. The other girls who worked there, pretty Sally with her golden curls, vivacious Mary with her tinkling laugh, they all found husbands within months. But not plain Clara. That evening, in the saloon across the street, 5 men huddled around a corner table, whiskey flowing freely. Jake Morrison, the banker's son with too much time and money on his hands, slapped the table with glee. "I've got it, boys. The perfect jest." His eyes glinted with cruel mirth. "You know that mountain hermit up in Devil's Canyon? Jebediah Boone. The one who shot at Thompson's crew last spring?" Pete Wilson leaned in, interested. "That's him. Word is he's been asking about mail-order brides down in Cheyenne. Can you imagine that scarred-up recluse thinking any woman would have him?" The men laughed, but Jake raised his hand. "Here's where it gets rich, boys. What if we send him a bride, our very own plain Clara?" The laughter died into contemplative silence before erupting again. Louder this time. "She'd probably thank us for it." Tom Bradley wheezed between guffaws. "Any husband's better than no husband for a girl like that." Jake produced a daguerreotype from his vest, a photo he'd stolen from the boarding house parlor, showing Clarabelle in profile, her plain features stark against the dark background. "I'll write the letter myself. Tell him she's eager to marry, good with household work, won't mention she's got a face that could sour milk." 2 weeks later, Clarabelle received a letter that would change her life. Mrs. Henderson handed it to her with barely concealed curiosity. "For you, Clara, from somewhere up north." With trembling fingers, Clarabelle opened the envelope. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed. "Miss Mason, I am told you seek a husband. I seek a wife. I have a cabin, land, and need for a woman's help. I am not a man of pretty words. If you are willing, take the train to Rock Springs, then the weekly supply wagon to Devil's Canyon. J. Boone." Attached was a train ticket and a small sum for traveling expenses. Clarabelle read it 3 times, her heart pounding. Someone wanted her. Someone had chosen her. She didn't question why or how he'd heard of her. In her desperation, she saw only escape from a life of mockery and servitude. Her parents barely protested when she announced her plans. Her mother packed her a small trunk with a few decent dresses she owned, pressing a worn Bible into her hands. "Write when you can," she said, not meeting Clarabelle's eyes. Her father muttered something about it being for the best. 3 days later, Clarabelle stood on the train platform, her trunk at her feet, wearing her best dress, a faded brown wool that had seen better days. The town wives watched from across the street, whispering behind their hands. She heard Jake Morrison's distinctive laugh from the saloon porch, but didn't turn to look. The train journey to Rock Springs took 2 days. Clarabelle sat rigidly in her seat, watching the landscape change from prairie to foothills to proper mountains. Other passengers gave her curious looks. A plain woman traveling alone was unusual, but she kept her eyes on the window, imagining her new life. Perhaps Jebediah Boone would be kind, Perhaps he wouldn't mind her unremarkable face if she kept his house clean and his meals hot. In Rock Springs, she found the supply wagon driver, a grizzled man named Elijah, who squinted at her letter and spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Devil's Canyon, eh? You sure about this, miss? That Boone fellow ain't exactly sociable." "He's expecting me," Clarabelle said with more confidence than she felt. The wagon ride took another full day, climbing into mountains that grew progressively wilder and more forbidding. Snow began to fall as they ascended, and Clarabelle pulled her thin shawl tighter. They passed no other travelers, no homesteads, nothing but pine trees and granite peaks. "This is as far as I go," Elijah announced suddenly, pulling the wagon to a stop where a barely visible trail branched off into the forest. "Boone's place is another 2 miles up that path. You sure you want to do this, miss? I could take you back down. No charge." Clarabelle looked at the darkening trail, then back at the driver. Going back meant admitting defeat, returning to mockery and shame. "I'm sure." She dragged her trunk from the wagon and watched Elijah turn around, leaving her alone in the gathering dusk. The snow fell heavier now, and she realized she had no choice but to press forward. She couldn't manage the trunk on the rough trail, so she took what she could carry in a canvas sack and began to walk. The trail was treacherous. Switching back up the mountainside, her boots, made for town streets, slipped on loose rocks and snow. Darkness fell completely, and she stumbled forward by what little moonlight penetrated the clouds. Her fingers went numb, her feet ached, and fear crept in with the cold. What if she couldn't find the cabin? What if she froze to death here, and no one ever knew what became of plain Clara? Just when despair threatened to overwhelm her, she saw it, a faint glow through the trees. A cabin, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, smoke rising from a stone chimney. She stumbled to the door and knocked with frozen knuckles. Heavy footsteps approached. The door swung open, and Clarabelle's breath caught. Jebediah Boone was enormous, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled the doorframe. His face was a landscape of scars, one cutting through his left eyebrow, another across his jaw. His hair was black and wild, his beard untrimmed, but it was his eyes that held her, gray as winter storm clouds, cold and utterly shocked. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was rough as gravel. I'm Clarabelle Mason, your bride?" Those storm cloud eyes widened, then narrowed. He looked past her into the empty trail, then back at her snow-covered, shivering form. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the plain, desperate woman and the scarred, bewildered man. "I didn't send for any bride," he said finally. The world seemed to tilt under Clarabelle's feet. She pulled the letter from her coat with numb fingers. "But you wrote—" He took the letter, scanned it, and his expression darkened further. "This isn't my writing." They stood frozen in that moment, him in the warm doorway, her on the threshold with the snow gathering on her shoulders, both realizing they had been played for fools. Somewhere down in Cedar Creek, Clarabelle thought distantly, Jake Morrison and his friends were probably laughing themselves sick over their clever joke. A gust of wind sent snow swirling between them, and Clarabelle swayed on her feet. Whatever Jebediah Boone saw in her face in that moment, desperation, exhaustion, or simply the onset of frostbite, it made him step aside. "Get in before you freeze to death," he growled. "We'll sort this out come morning." Clarabelle stumbled into the cabin, not knowing that she was crossing more than just a threshold. She was stepping into a life that would test every strength she didn't know she had, and awaken a love neither of them believed possible. The warmth of the cabin hit Clarabelle like a physical force, making her knees buckle. Jebediah caught her elbow, a brief, impersonal touch, and steered her toward a rough-hewn chair near the fireplace. The cabin was sparse but clean, one room with a stone hearth, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with supplies, and a table with 2 chairs, as if he'd been expecting company he never received. "You're half frozen," he stated, not a question. He moved with surprising efficiency for such a large man, hanging a kettle over the fire and pulling a heavy wool blanket from a trunk. He dropped it around her shoulders without ceremony, then retreated to the far side of the room, putting the table between them like a barrier. Clarabelle huddled in the blanket, teeth chattering. "Thank you," she managed. He grunted, pouring hot water into a tin cup and adding something from a ceramic jar, pine needle tea. She realized when he set it before her. The warmth spreading through her fingers was almost painful. "Storm setting in," he said, peering out the single window. "No going anywhere tonight. Tomorrow, when it clears, I'll take you back down to Rock Springs." Clarabelle's voice failed her. Go back to what? She had no money for return fare, no job waiting, no family that wanted her. "I have nowhere to go." His scarred face remained impassive. "Not my problem." They sat in uncomfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Clarabelle noticed things in the flickering light, how his left hand trembled slightly when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he kept his scarred side turned away from her, a daguerreotype on the mantle of a woman and small child. Their faces turned down. "I can work," she said suddenly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I could stay until spring, earn my passage back. I don't need help." But even as he said it, Clarabelle's eyes took in the pile of torn clothing in the corner, the layer of soot on the cooking pots, the sparse supplies that suggested a man who survived rather than lived. "Please," she said, hating how desperate she sounded. "Just until the snow melts." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You'll sleep by the fire. Don't touch anything. Don't go outside. When the storm breaks, you leave." He retreated to his bed, turning his back to her. Clarabelle heard him settle onto the straw mattress, but his breathing never evened out into sleep. She curled up on the floor near the hearth, using her canvas sack as a pillow, and wondered how she'd gone from being a joke in Cedar Creek to being an unwanted burden in Devil's Canyon. She woke to find him already gone, the door barred from the outside. Through the window, she could see nothing but swirling white. The storm had worsened overnight, and she realized with a sinking heart that she was effectively a prisoner. But Clarabelle Mason had spent her life making herself useful to people who didn't want her. She surveyed the cabin with practical eyes. The man might not want help, but he clearly needed it. She started with the dishes, heating water and scrubbing years of buildup from the few tin plates and cups. Then the floor, sweeping out dirt and debris. She found a needle and thread in a drawer and began mending the pile of torn clothing, shirts with ripped seams, trousers with holes worn through at the knees. When Jebediah returned at midday, stamping snow from his boots and carrying an armload of firewood, he stopped short in the doorway. His eyes swept the cleaner cabin, landed on her sitting at his table with his shirt in her lap, needle flashing in the dim light. "I said don't touch anything, and I said I could work." She kept her eyes on her stitching, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Your shirt had 5 tears, now it has none." He dumped the wood by the hearth with unnecessary force. "I know what you don't want," Clarabelle interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "But we're stuck here until the storm breaks, and I won't sit idle." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, at being interrupted. He hung his snow-covered coat on a peg and sat down across from her, watching her work with those unsettling gray eyes. "Why did you come?" he asked finally. "Really?" Clarabelle set down the needle. "Because I believed someone wanted me, because I was tired of being plain Clara, the girl no one would marry, because I thought—" She laughed bitterly. "I thought even a mountain hermit would be better than dying a spinster in a town that saw me as a joke. And now," she met his eyes, "now I know I was the punchline to someone's cruel game. But I'm here, and you're stuck with me until the snow clears, so we might as well make the best of it." Days passed in this uneasy truce. Clarabelle cooked meals from his meager supplies, beans and salt pork, cornmeal mush, whatever dried vegetables she could find. Jebediah left each morning to tend trap lines or hunt, returning with rabbit or deer when he was lucky. They ate in silence, slept on opposite sides of the cabin, and spoke only when necessary. But at night, the silence broke in ways that made Clarabelle's heart ache. The first time, she woke to the sound of thrashing and low moans. In the dim firelight, she saw Jebediah twisted in his blankets, face contorted in anguish. Words tumbled from his lips. "Sarah," and "No, please," and what sounded like a child's name. "Lucy." She lay frozen, unsure whether to wake him or let the nightmare run its course. But when he cried out sharply, a sound of pure grief, she couldn't bear it. She crept across the floor and gently touched his shoulder. "Mr. Boone, Jebediah, you're dreaming." His eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her. Then awareness returned, and with it, a wall of ice. He jerked away from her touch. "Get back to your place." She retreated, but the damage was done. She'd seen behind his armor, glimpsed the broken man beneath the scars. The daguerreotype on the mantel took on new meaning. The woman must be Sarah, the child Lucy, both lost, judging by his nightmares. She didn't mention it the next morning, just set his coffee before him and went about her work. But that night, when the nightmares came again, she didn't touch him. Instead, she simply moved her blanket closer to his corner and began to hum, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing, low and soothing. The thrashing gradually stilled. His breathing evened out. She kept humming until she was sure he slept peacefully. In the morning, he found an extra blanket had been added to her makeshift bed by the fire. Neither of them mentioned it. The storm raged for a week, then 2. They developed a routine born of necessity. She cooked and cleaned and mended. He hunted and chopped wood and maintained a careful distance. But the edges began to soften. He started bringing her small things from his outings, pine cones for kindling, wintergreen leaves for tea, once a handful of rose hips that added precious sweetness to their morning porridge. One evening, as she darned yet another sock, he surprised her by speaking unprompted. "You do good work." She looked up. He was carving something from a piece of pine, not meeting her eyes. "My mother taught me. Said a woman's worth was in her useful hands, not her pretty face." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "Your mother was wrong." Clarabelle's needle stilled. "What?" He looked up then, those gray eyes steady on hers. "A person's worth isn't in their hands or their face. It's in how they treat others when they think no one's watching." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Thank you." He went back to his carving, and she to her darning. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The breaking point came during the 3rd week. Clarabelle had been washing clothes in water heated on the stove, her hands red and cracked from the lye soap. She reached for Jebediah's good shirt, the one she'd mended that first day, and noticed how thin the fabric had worn at the elbows. Without thinking, she went to his trunk to see if there was spare cloth for patches. "What are you doing?" She hadn't heard him return. He stood in the doorway, face dark with anger. "I was just looking for cloth to... I said don't touch my things." The roar made her stumble backward. He crossed the room in 2 strides, slamming the trunk lid down. "You have no right. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for any of this." His voice cracked on the last word. And suddenly Clarabelle understood. The trunk didn't just hold cloth. It held memories. Sarah's things, Lucy's things. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean... Just don't." He turned away, shoulders rigid. "The storm's breaking." "You'll leave tomorrow." That night, his nightmares were worse than ever. Clarabelle lay rigid on her blanket, listening to him moan Sarah's name, Lucy's name, apologies tumbling from his lips. When he cried out sharply, she couldn't stand it anymore. She rose, grabbed the spare blanket, and quietly laid it over his thrashing form. His hand shot out, catching her wrist. His eyes were open, aware, filled with such raw pain that her heart clenched. "They're gone," he whispered. "Because of me. They're gone." She didn't pull away. Instead, she carefully sat on the floor beside his bed. his hand still gripping her wrist. "Tell me." And in the darkness, with the dying storm rattling the windows, he did. The story poured out in broken pieces. Sarah, his beautiful wife, Lucy, their 3-year-old daughter, the Cheyenne raid that came while he was away getting supplies, how he'd returned to find their cabin burned, their bodies. He couldn't finish that part. How he'd fled to these mountains, as far from civilization as he could get, living with the guilt of not being there, not protecting them. "Everyone I touch dies," he finished, his voice hollow. "It's better I stay alone." Clarabelle felt tears on her cheeks, very carefully. She turned her wrist in his grip until she could clasp his hand. "You didn't kill them, and pushing away everyone who tries to care won't bring them back." He stared at their joined hands as if he'd never seen such a thing. Then, slowly, like a man dying of thirst accepting water, he squeezed back. They sat like that until dawn broke, neither speaking, just holding on. When the first light crept through the window, Jebediah finally released her hand. "The pass will be clear by noon," he said, voice rough. "I'll take you down to Rock Springs." Clarabelle stood on stiff legs, looking down at him. For the first time since she'd arrived, she saw him clearly. Not the scars, not the size, but the man underneath. Broken, yes, but not beyond repair. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked softly. His eyes widened, something flickering in those gray depths. Hope, maybe quickly suppressed. "This is no place for a woman. I'm no fit husband for anyone." "I didn't ask to be your wife," Clarabelle said. "I'm asking to stay, to help, to—" She took a breath. "To be your friend. If you'll let me." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "The winter's long up here, hard, lonely." "I know about lonely." Their eyes met and held, two damaged souls recognizing something in each other. "Finally." He nodded, just once, barely perceptible. "You can stay, until spring." It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even acceptance, really, but it was a beginning. And for two people who'd forgotten how to hope, a beginning was everything. The blizzard arrived 3 days later, worse than anything that had come before. It screamed down from the peaks like a living thing, turning the world into a wall of white. Jebediah had barely made it back from checking his trap lines, ice coating his beard. His lips blue with cold. "This one's going to last," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Could be weeks." Clarabelle looked at their supplies. Adequate, if they were careful, but the wood pile would need constant replenishing. "We'll manage." Something in her calm certainty made him look at her sharply, but he said nothing. The storm trapped them in a world shrunk down to one room. The cabin groaned under the weight of snow, wind finding every tiny gap in the chinking. They had to keep the fire burning constantly, taking turns through the night to feed it, or risk freezing. By the 4th day, their carefully maintained distance became impossible. The cold was too bitter, the space too small. They found themselves sitting closer to the fire, shoulders almost touching, sharing the warmth. "Here," Clarabelle said one evening, noticing him favoring his left shoulder. "You've been chopping wood all day. Let me—" She moved behind him before he could protest, her hands finding the knots in his muscles. He went rigid at first, unused to touch that didn't bring pain, but as her fingers worked out the tension, he gradually relaxed. "Where did you learn this?" "Taking care of my grandmother. Before she passed, she had terrible rheumatics." Her hands stilled. "That's when they started calling me Plain Clara. Said I was suited for tending the sick and old, since no man would want me." He turned slightly, catching her wrist gently. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Calling yourself that. Plain Clara." His thumb brushed over her palm, calloused against calloused. "You're not plain." She laughed, but it came out shaky. "You don't need to be kind." "I'm not kind," he said firmly. "Ask anyone, but I know what I see." Their eyes met, held. The fire crackled. Slowly, as if moving through honey, he lifted his other hand to her face, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "What do you see?" she whispered. Strength, he said. Kindness. Beauty that doesn't shout. His hand dropped. Things I don't deserve. Before she could respond, he stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire. The moment broke, but something had fundamentally changed. The air between them hummed with unspoken possibility. As the storm raged on, their world continued to shrink. They shared meals in comfortable silence, played cards with a worn deck she found, told stories of their childhoods. She learned he'd grown up in Tennessee, joined the Army young, met Sarah at a dance in Kansas. He learned she'd been born in Ohio, moved west with her parents seeking opportunity, found only hardship and judgment. One night, the wood ran dangerously low. Jebediah wrapped himself in furs to fight through the snow to the woodpile. But even the short distance from door to shed was treacherous. Clarabelle watched anxiously through the window, barely able to see his shape in the swirling white. When he didn't return after 10 minutes, fear clawed at her throat. She grabbed a rope from his supplies, tied one end to the door handle, and plunged into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow. She couldn't see more than a foot ahead, could barely breathe through the driving snow. Following the wall of the cabin, she fought her way toward where the woodshed should be. She found him collapsed just outside it, half buried already. The cold had seized his muscles, an old war wound in his leg giving out. Without thinking, she grabbed him under the arms and hauled with strength born of desperation. He was too heavy, but she refused to let go, dragging him inch by inch back toward the cabin, following the rope when she could no longer see. They tumbled through the door together, gasping. She slammed it shut and turned to find him shivering violently, his clothes soaked through with snow. "You little fool!" he gasped through chattering teeth. "Could have died." "Shut up," she said, already working at the frozen buckles of his coat. "We need to get you warm." His hands were too numb to help. She stripped him down to his union suit with clinical efficiency, wrapped him in every blanket they had, and stoked the fire until it roared. But still he shivered. She knew what needed to be done. Without hesitation, she lay down beside him under the blankets, wrapping her arms around him, sharing her body heat. He tried to protest, but she held firm. "Don't argue. This is how we survived blizzards in Ohio." Gradually, his shivering eased. She felt the moment he truly relaxed against her, his breath evening out. They lay there in the firelight, her arms around him, his back pressed to her front, and Clarabelle realized she felt more at home than she ever had in her life. "Clara," he said softly, using her given name for the first time without the cruel prefix. "Thank you." She pressed her forehead against his shoulder blade. "Always." The next morning brought awkwardness. They woke, still entwined, faces flushed with more than warmth. He pulled away first, muttering about checking the storm, and she let him go, but the barrier between them had crumbled beyond repair. That evening, as she prepared their simple meal, he surprised her by speaking. "My mother had a saying," he said, whittling a piece of wood. "Beauty is as beauty does." Never understood it as a boy. And now, he looked up at her, those gray eyes warm for once. "Now I watch you move through my home like you belong here. Watch you face down a blizzard to save a fool who's been nothing but cold to you. Watch you hum while you work, bringing music where there was only silence." He set down his knife. "I understand it now." Clarabelle's hand stilled on the pot she was stirring. "Jebediah, you saved my life today, not just from the cold, from," he gestured helplessly, "from becoming a ghost in my own skin." She moved around the table, kneeling beside his chair so they were eye level. "You saved mine too. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You see me as more than plain Clara." "There's nothing plain about you," he said fiercely. "Nothing." Their faces were inches apart. She could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could count the lines that pain had etched at their corners. His hand came up to cup her cheek, work-roughened palm gentle against her skin. "Clara," he breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was tentative at first. Two people who'd forgotten how to trust reaching for each other across a gulf of hurt. Then her hand came up to thread through his hair, and he made a sound low in his throat, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm no good for you," he whispered. "I'm broken. Clara, I have nightmares. I forget how to be gentle. She silenced him with another kiss, brief but firm. "We're all broken somehow, but broken things can be mended." She smiled, thinking of all the clothes she'd repaired. They're often stronger for it. That night, when he woke from nightmares, she was there, not across the room, but beside him, her hand finding his in the dark. He gripped it like a lifeline. "Tell me about her," Clara said softly. "Tell me about Lucy." And he did. For the first time in 3 years. He spoke of his daughter not with only grief, but with love. Her laugh like silver bells. How she called rabbits bounce bounce. Her fearlessness. Climbing trees before she could properly walk. Clara listened, holding his hand, letting him pour out memories like water from a burst dam. "She would have loved you," he said finally, voice rough. "Sarah, too. She always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness." "I'm not trying to replace them," Clara said carefully. "I couldn't if I tried." "I know." He turned on his side to face her in the dim light. "That's not what this is. This is different. New," she smiled, touching his scarred cheek. "New can be good." "Yes," he agreed, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "It can." The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, two wounded hearts began the slow, careful work of healing. They talked through the night, sharing pain and hope in equal measure, building something neither had dared dream of finding. When dawn broke, the blizzard had finally begun to ease. Weak sunlight filtered through the frost-covered window, painting the cabin in soft gold. Jebediah and Clara lay facing each other, hands clasped between them, having talked themselves into peaceful exhaustion. "Stay," he said suddenly, as if the word had been pulled from him. "Not just until spring. Stay." Clara's heart lurched. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Jebediah Boone." "I'm asking you to try," he said, "to see if two broken people can build something whole. To let me court you proper, even if it's just here in our cabin. To give us time." "Time," she repeated, tasting the word like honey. "Yes, we have time." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his scarred face. And Clara thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful. Outside, the storm was ending. Inside, something new and fragile and precious was just beginning. They rose together to face the day, moving around each other with new awareness, new tenderness. The blizzard had trapped them, forced them close. But it was choice that kept them there, side by side, as the sun broke over Devil's Canyon and blessed their unexpected love with light. The days following the blizzard passed in a strange dance of advance and retreat. Jebediah would find reasons to touch Clara, steadying her elbow as she reached for supplies, brushing snow from her shawl, letting their fingers linger when passing dishes. But then he'd catch himself and pull back, as if remembering some invisible boundary. Clara understood. 3 years of self-imposed isolation couldn't be undone in days. She gave him space while staying close, like gentling a wounded animal. Then came the wolf. It appeared at dusk, limping through the snow toward their cabin. Clara saw it first through the window, a gray shadow against white, favoring its right foreleg. "Jebediah," she called softly. "There's a wolf." He was beside her in an instant, rifle in hand. The wolf had collapsed 20 feet from their door, its sides heaving. Even from inside, they could see the dark stain spreading across the snow. "Caught in a trap, looks like," Jebediah muttered. "Tore its leg up getting free." He moved toward the door, rifle ready. But Clara caught his arm. "It's suffering. It's a wolf, Clara. Dangerous. It's hurt and frightened." She looked up at him, like we all are sometimes. Something in her words made him pause. He studied her face, then sighed. "You want me to help a wolf? Lord save me from tender-hearted women. But he set the rifle aside and pulled on his coat. Stay inside. If it goes for me, you bar the door. Clara watched through the window as he approached the wounded animal slowly, speaking in low, steady tones. The wolf lifted its head, baring teeth in warning, but was too weak to do more. Jebediah circled carefully, assessing. Then, in one smooth motion, he threw his coat over the wolf's head and pinned it. The wolf thrashed weakly. Jebediah's face contorted with effort as he held it down, and Clara saw red bloom across his shirt sleeve. The wolf had caught him with its teeth. Without thinking, she grabbed clean cloths and the whiskey they used for medicinal purposes and rushed outside. "Damn it, Clara, I told you!" "Hold him still," she said firmly, kneeling beside them. The wolf's leg was mangled, caught in what looked like a beaver trap's teeth, working quickly. She poured whiskey over the wound, causing the wolf to convulse. Jebediah held firm, his own blood now dripping onto the snow. "This is foolish," he growled, but there was something like wonder in his voice as he watched her work. She bound the wolf's leg as best she could, then turned her attention to Jebediah's arm. The bite wasn't deep, but it needed cleaning. "Inside, now." They left the wolf lying in the snow, still covered by Jebediah's coat. Once inside, Clara forced him into a chair and rolled up his sleeve. The puncture wounds were clean, but bleeding freely. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then poured whiskey over the wounds. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. She worked in silence, cleaning and binding the bite with steady hands. Only when she tied off the bandage did she realize how close they were, her standing between his knees, his face level with her chest, his good hand resting on her hip. "Clara," he said roughly. She looked down at him, at this scarred, complicated man who'd help a wounded predator because she asked him to. Her hands came up to frame his face, thumbs tracing the lines pain had carved there. "You're a good man, Jebediah Boone. I'm not—" She silenced him by bending down and pressing her lips to his. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, hungrier. His arms came around her, pulling her tight against him, and she gasped at the contact. Years of loneliness, of being unwanted, untouched, seemed to ignite between them. When his lips moved to her throat, she made a sound she'd never made before, her hands fisted in his hair, holding him close. He stood suddenly, lifting her onto the table, stepping between her legs. The solid wood creaked under their combined weight. "Clara," he said again, pulling back to look at her. His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide. "We should what?" She was breathing hard, her proper upbringing warring with the fire in her blood. "Wait, be careful, follow rules." Her hands slid down to his shoulders. "I've been careful my whole life. I've followed every rule. Where did it get me?" He cupped her face in his hands, studying her with an intensity that made her shiver. "You deserve better than a man who sees me," she interrupted. "Who saved me from freezing? Who makes me feel—" She broke off, heat flooding her cheeks. "Feel what?" His voice was rough velvet. "Wanted," she whispered. "Beautiful, like a woman instead of a piece of furniture." He made a sound low in his throat and kissed her again, fierce and claiming. Her legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer, and she felt him shudder against her. His hands tangled in her hair, loosening the severe bun she always wore, sending pins scattering across the floor. "Your hair," he murmured against her mouth. "Like silk. Been wanting to touch it for days." The admission broke something in her. All the years of being told she wasn't enough, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't worthy of desire. They crumbled under the weight of his wanting. She pulled back just enough to look at him. This man who saw beauty where others saw only plainness. "The bed," she said softly. "Please." He went still. "Clara, we're not married. If we—" "I know." Her hand slid down to rest over his heart, feeling its rapid beat. "But I'm already ruined, aren't I? An unmarried woman living with a man? No decent town would have me now." She smiled, surprised to find freedom in the truth. So why not be ruined by my own choice, with a man who sees me? He searched her face for a long moment. Then he lifted her from the table, carrying her the few steps to his narrow bed. He set her down gently, reverent as a man placing an offering at an altar. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, she reached up and began unbuttoning her dress. His breath caught as worn fabric parted to reveal the chemise beneath. She'd never felt beautiful before, but the way he looked at her, like a man dying of thirst seeing water, made her feel like Helen of Troy. What followed was clumsy and tender by turns. Neither spoke of experience or lack thereof, but their fumbling had the sweetness of discovery. He mapped her body with work-roughened hands that shook slightly, pressed kisses to scars she didn't know she had. She traced the marks on his skin bullet wounds, knife scars, the deep groove across his ribs where he'd taken grape shot at Chancellorsville. When they came together at last, Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out. Jebediah went still, his forehead pressed to hers. "Am I hurting you?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the fullness in her chest that had nothing to do with their physical joining and everything to do with the tenderness in his eyes. He moved slowly, carefully, whispering her name like a prayer. She held him close, marveling at the feeling of being treasured, desired, seen. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin cooling in the cabin's chill. Jebediah pulled the heavy quilts over them, tucking her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, still rapid, under her ear. "I should feel ashamed," she said quietly. "But I don't." His arm tightened around her. "Good. There's no shame in this. In us." "The wolf," she said suddenly, remembering. "We should check. Let him be for now. He'll either live or die on his own terms." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Like us all." They dozed, waking when full dark fell. Jebediah rose to stoke the fire and check outside. The wolf was gone, only blood-stained snow showing where it had lain. Jebediah's coat was dragged a few feet away, but still there. "Tough creature," he said, pulling the door closed against the cold. "Might make it after all." Clara sat up in bed, holding the quilt to her chest, watching him move around the cabin. The firelight played across his scarred back, turning him into something mythical. He turned and caught her looking, and his face softened. "No regrets?" "None." She held out her hand. "Come back to bed." He did, gathering her close. They talked in whispers, though there was no one to hear, about the future, about possibilities, about fears. He told her more about Sarah and Lucy, and she realized it no longer hurt him the same way. The grief was there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed him. "They'd want me to be happy," he said into the darkness. "I fought against knowing that for 3 years. And now?" He turned to face her, cupping her cheek. "Now I have a brave woman who saves wolves and broken men, who sees worth where others see none, who makes my cabin feel like a home again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You make me feel like I'm worth seeing." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's rhythms. Clara discovered she could make him gasp by nipping at his shoulder, that he was ticklish just below his ribs. He found that kissing the inside of her wrist made her shiver, that she sighed his name when he... A howl split the night, long and mournful. Then another, answering, "The wolf." Clara breathed. "It's calling its pack, or telling them about the strange humans who helped it." Jebediah said wryly, "We'll be legends among wolves now." She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "I can think of worse things to be." "So can I," he agreed, pulling her close again. "So can I." They fell asleep as snow began to fall again. Gentle this time. In the morning, they'd find wolf tracks circling the cabin, not threatening, just curious. They'd see their borrowed coat hung carefully on a fence post, as if returned by creatures capable of gratitude. They'd face the questions that daylight brings to lovers who've crossed lines in darkness. But for now, they simply held each other, two souls no longer alone in the wilderness. Outside, The wolf sang to its pack about survival and strange mercies. Inside, Clara and Jebediah wrote their own song without words, a melody of touch and breath and heart slowly, carefully opening. The mountains stood witness to transformation, not just of a plain woman and a scarred man finding beauty in each other, but of two wounded hearts learning that sometimes the greatest courage is not in facing death or violence or the judgment of the world. Sometimes the greatest courage is in choosing to live again, to love again, to believe that broken things can indeed be mended and made stronger than before. The morning after brought a silence heavy with unspoken fears. Clara woke to find Jebediah already dressed, standing at the window with his back to her. The rigid set of his shoulders told her everything. "You're having second thoughts," she said quietly, pulling the quilt around herself. He didn't turn. "I took advantage. You did no such thing." She rose, wrapping herself in the blanket, and moved to stand beside him. "I chose this. I chose you." "You don't understand what you're choosing." His voice was rough. "Living up here, isolated from the world, no church, no society, no proper marriage." "Then marry me," she said simply. "Today, now." He finally looked at her, eyes wide. "Clara, you said you wanted to court me proper. Well, court me then, but don't push me away because you think you're protecting me." She lifted her chin. "I've had a lifetime of people deciding what's best for me. Don't you start now." Something shifted in his expression. He reached out, touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You deserve—" "I deserve to choose," she interrupted. "And I choose the man who helped a wounded wolf because I asked, who holds me through nightmares not his own, who sees beauty where others see only plainness." He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "I'm trying to be noble. I don't need noble. I need you." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, casting diamond sparkles across the snow. Finally, he pulled back. "Decision made. All right then, get dressed. We're going to town." "Town?" Clara blinked. "But—" "If we're doing this, we're doing it right, legal, proper, so no one can ever say you're not my wife." His jaw set stubbornly. "So you can never doubt it yourself." The journey to Rock Springs took most of the day. They rode double on his horse. Clara's arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. The mountain trail was treacherous with fresh snow, but Jebediah navigated it with sure confidence. They spoke little, but Clara felt his tension in the set of his shoulders. As they descended toward civilization, he grew more rigid, more wary. She understood. 3 years of isolation weren't easily overcome. Rock Springs appeared in the valley below, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving about their business. Jebediah reined in the horse, breathing hard. "We don't have to," Clara began. "Yes," he said firmly. "We do." He twisted in the saddle to look at her. "But Clara, there's something you should know about how Sarah and Lucy died." She waited, sensing the importance of this moment. "I wasn't just away getting supplies," he said, each word dragged from him. "I was in town, drinking, celebrating a good fur season. I stayed an extra night, playing cards, being fool enough to think I had time." His voice cracked. "If I'd gone home when I should have—" Clara's arms tightened around him. "You couldn't have known, but I should have been there, should have protected them. Instead, I was—" He shook his head. "The whole town knew I was drinking while my family died. They were right to turn their backs on me." "They were wrong," Clara said fiercely. "You made a mistake, a human mistake. That doesn't make you responsible for what evil men did." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, "You still want to marry me, knowing that?" "More than ever," she said, and meant it. They rode into Rock Springs as afternoon shadows grew long. People stopped to stare. The hermit of Devil's Canyon with a woman. Clara felt their eyes, heard the whispers start, but kept her head high. Let them look, let them wonder. The courthouse was a simple wooden building that also served as post office and land registry. The clerk, a thin man named Josiah Pritchard, nearly dropped his pen when they walked in. Mr. Boone, he stammered. We haven't seen you in— Need a marriage license. Jebediah cut him off. And a justice of the peace. Today. Pritchard's eyes darted to Clara, took in her plain dress, her worn boots, the way she stood close to Jebediah without shame. Of course, Judge Morrison is in his chambers. Not Morrison. Jebediah's voice went cold. Clara remembered Jake Morrison, the banker's son who'd orchestrated the cruel joke. His father was the judge. Then, Reverend Campbell could— That'll do. As Pritchard scurried off to make arrangements, Clara touched Jebediah's arm. Morrison? Is he Jake's father? The apple didn't fall far from that tree. He looked down at her. You sure you want to go through with this? Once word gets out, there'll be no going back to your old life. What old life? Clara smiled sadly. The one where I was a joke? A burden? I'd rather be your wife in the wilderness than plain Clara in any town. The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Pritchard and his wife, a pinch-faced woman who kept shooting Clara pitying looks. Reverend Campbell, young and earnest, performed the service with genuine warmth, seeming pleased to marry folks regardless of the circumstances. Do you, Jebediah Boone, take this woman? I do, Jebediah said firmly, cutting through the traditional words, today and always. Clara's heart swelled as she spoke her own vows, the simple gold band Jebediah produced. It was my mother's, he whispered, fit perfectly on her work-worn finger. You may kiss your bride, the Reverend pronounced. Jebediah cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Someone, probably Mrs. Pritchard gasped at the public display, but Clara didn't care. She was kissing her husband, the man who saw her truly. They were preparing to leave when commotion erupted outside. Jake Morrison and his cronies had gathered, drawn by gossip of the hermit's return. Well, well, Jake drawled as they emerged. If it ain't the mountain man and his mail-order bride, how's married life treating you? Plain, Clara? Jebediah went still as stone. Clara felt the violence coiling in him, ready to explode. She stepped forward before he could move. It's Mrs. Boone now, she said calmly. And married life is wonderful. Thank you for asking, though I should thank you, Mr. Morrison. Jake blinked, thrown off. Thank me? Of course. Clara smiled sweetly. If not for your little joke, I never would have found my husband. Never would have discovered what real love looks like. So yes, thank you for sending me to the best man I've ever known. She felt Jebediah's hand find hers, squeezed tight. Jake's face went red, then purple. You think you've won something? He snarled. Marrying a drunk who let his family die? You'll end up just like— The crack of Jebediah's fist against Jake's jaw was loud as a gunshot. Jake went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. His friends stepped back as Jebediah loomed over their fallen leader. Speak my wife's name again, Jebediah said quietly. And I'll kill you. Speak of my family again, and they'll never find your body. Are we clear? Jake nodded frantically, hands pressed to his bleeding nose. Jebediah turned to the others, and they scattered like chickens. Can we go home now? Clara asked softly. The tension drained from him. Yes, he said, helping her mount the horse. Let's go home. They rode out of Rock Springs with supplies Jebediah had quickly purchased. Flour, coffee, ammunition, and small luxuries he'd slipped in when he thought she wasn't looking. The sun was setting as they climbed back into the mountains, painting the peaks rose and gold. I'm sorry, he said as they neared the cabin, for losing my temper, for hitting him. You deserve better. I deserve a husband who defends my honor. Clara interrupted. Who stands up to bullies? Who chooses to be better than they are? She pressed a kiss to his shoulder blade. I'm proud to be your wife. They reached the cabin as stars began to appear. Their home, truly theirs now, looked welcoming in the gathering dark, smoke still trickling from the chimney they'd banked that morning. As Jebediah helped her down from the horse, she noticed something different. Look, she breathed. There on the porch sat a haunch of venison, fresh and cleanly butchered. No human tracks led to or from it, but in the snow around it, Wolf prints circled the cabin. Payment for services rendered. Jebediah murmured, wonder in his voice. I'll be damned. They carried the meat inside, both marveling at the strange gift. As Clara prepared their wedding supper from the unexpected bounty, Jebediah built up the fire and lit every candle they owned. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making it special," he said gruffly. "You deserve a proper wedding night, not just what happened before." Clara set down her knife and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "What happened before was perfect, but this—" She gestured at the warm, glowing cabin, their simple meal, their quiet joy. "This is home." They ate by candlelight, talking softly of plans and dreams. The cabin would need expanding if, when children came, the garden she wanted to plant come spring, the furniture he could build now that he had reason to make a true home again. When they finally retired to bed, their marriage bed now, it was with a different energy than before. No desperate hunger, no fear of morning regrets. Just two people choosing each other, again and again, with every touch and sigh and whispered endearment. "My wife," Jebediah murmured against her skin, as if testing the words. "My beautiful wife." "My husband?" Clara replied, threading her fingers through his hair. "My wolf-saving, noble-hearted husband." Later, as they lay entwined, Clara heard it again, the wolf howl, distant but clear. Others answered, a chorus that seemed to bless their union. She smiled against Jebediah's chest, thinking of the strange turns life could take, sent as a cruel joke. She'd found her true home, scorned as plain Clara. She'd become beloved wife to a man who saw her beauty. "What are you thinking?" Jebediah asked, feeling her smile. "That broken things really can be mended," she said, "and sometimes they're stronger for it." He tilted her chin up, kissed her softly. "Sometimes they are," he agreed. "Sometimes they surely are." 2 weeks into their marriage, Clara made a decision that would test everything they'd built. The morning dawned clear and cold, perfect for what she had in mind. "I'm going for a walk," she announced after breakfast, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Jebediah looked up from the trap he was repairing. "I'll come with you." "No." She softened the refusal with a smile. "I need some time alone, to think." Concern flickered in his eyes. "Clara, if something's wrong—" "Nothing's wrong. I just need this." She kissed his cheek. "I won't go far." But she did go far. She followed the trail down the mountain, her steps sure now after weeks of traversing it. She had a destination in mind, a purpose that had been gnawing at her since their wedding day. It took 3 hours to reach the spot where the trail forked, one path leading to Rock Springs, the other to Cedar Creek, her old life, the place that had sent her away as a joke. Clara stood at the crossroads, heart pounding. Then, with determination, she took the path to Cedar Creek, back at the cabin. Jebediah tried to focus on his work, but worry ate at him. Clara had been quiet lately, distracted. Was she regretting their hasty marriage? Missing civilization? The fear that she'd leave, that he'd drive her away like he drove everyone away, made his hands shake. When noon came and went with no sign of her, he couldn't stand it anymore. He followed her tracks in the snow, dread building with each step. When he saw which fork she'd taken at the crossroads, his heart nearly stopped. She'd gone back to her old life, back to where she belonged. He stood there in the snow, staring at her footprints leading away from him, and felt something inside him break all over again. Of course she'd left. Why would someone like Clara stay with a broken man in a lonely cabin? He'd been fooling himself, thinking he deserved happiness again. Slowly, mechanically, he turned back toward the cabin. He'd wait 3 days. He decided, if she didn't return by then, he'd know for certain. He wouldn't chase her, wouldn't force her. If Clara wanted her freedom, he'd give it to her, even if it killed him. Meanwhile, Clara reached Cedar Creek as afternoon shadows grew long. The familiar streets felt strange now, smaller somehow. She kept her head high as people stopped to stare. Word of her marriage to the hermit had clearly spread. She had one stop to make, one thing to settle before she could truly move forward. The boarding house looked exactly the same. Mrs. Henderson answered her knock, eyes widening in shock. "Clara, we heard. That is, people are saying you married. Jebediah Boone. Yes." Clara stepped past her into the parlor. "Is my trunk still here? The one I couldn't carry?" "Well, yes, but I'll just collect it then." Clara moved toward the storage room. But Mrs. Henderson caught her arm. "Clara, dear, are you all right? Do you need help? That man, he's dangerous. They say he's my husband," Clara said firmly. "And he's the best man I've ever known. Now, my trunk." She retrieved her few remaining possessions, mostly keepsakes from her grandmother. As she emerged, she found a small crowd had gathered. Other boarding house girls, some townswives, all agog with curiosity. "Is it true he lives like a savage?" one whispered. "Does he beat you?" another asked. "Did he force you to marry him?" Clara set down her trunk and faced them all. "My husband lives simply and honestly. He treats me with more kindness and respect than anyone in this town ever did. And no one forced me to do anything, for the first time in my life. I chose my own path." "But you could have had a normal life," Sally protested. Pretty Sally, who'd found a shopkeeper husband within weeks. A house in town, society, proper things. "I have a home," Clara interrupted. "I have a man who sees my worth. I have love. What more could I want?" The women exchanged glances, clearly thinking her mad. Clara didn't care. She hefted her trunk and headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Sally? That shopkeeper husband of yours? He tried to kiss me once, when you were at church. Thought plain Clara would be grateful for the attention." She smiled at the girl's shocked face. "My husband would never do such a thing. He has honor." She left them gossiping and headed for one final stop. Jake Morrison's house, the finest in town, sat on the main street like a monument to his father's corruption. Clara marched up to the front door and knocked firmly. Jake himself answered, his jaw still bruised from Jebediah's fist. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. "Come to beg for civilized company already? Plain Clara?" "Mrs. Boone," she corrected. "And no, I came to thank you properly." "Thank me," he snorted. "For what?" "For writing that letter." "Oh, I know it was meant to be cruel. Send the ugly spinster to the mountain man. Have a good laugh." She stepped closer, and he actually backed up. "But you did me the greatest kindness of my life. You sent me to a man who sees beauty where you see ugliness, who has more honor in his scarred hands than you have in your whole body. You're deluded if you think, I think," Clara continued, "that you're a small, pathetic man who tears others down because he knows he'll never build anything worthwhile himself. I think you'll die in this town, pickled in whiskey and bitterness, while I'll live my life surrounded by love and mountains and freedom." Jake's face went purple. "You little—" "Goodbye, Mr. Morrison. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're really looking for, but I doubt you will. Men like you never do." She turned and walked away, leaving him speechless on his own doorstep. The trek back to the crossroads felt lighter somehow, as if she'd shed a weight she didn't know she'd been carrying. But as she climbed back up the mountain, new worry crept in. She'd been gone hours. What if Jebediah thought, oh no, what if he thought she'd left him? She practically ran the last mile, stumbling through the door as dusk fell. The cabin was dark, cold. Jebediah sat at the table, staring at nothing, a half-empty whiskey bottle before him. "Jebediah?" He looked up slowly, eyes red-rimmed and disbelieving. "Clara? Of course it's me. Why is it so cold in here? Why aren't the lamps—" She saw his face clearly then, the devastation written there. Oh, my darling, you thought I'd left." "You went back," he said dully, "to Cedar Creek. I followed your tracks." She dropped her trunk and flew to him, cupping his face in her hands. "To get my things, to tell them all exactly what I think of them, to close that chapter properly so I could come home to you." "You came back." His voice broke on the words. I was so sure you'd realized what a mistake. She kissed him fiercely, tasting whiskey and despair. Listen to me, Jebediah Boone. I will never leave you. Never. Do you understand? You're stuck with me until the mountains crumble to dust. He pulled her onto his lap, burying his face against her neck. She felt him shaking and held him tighter. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have trusted. Should have known. Shh, she stroked his hair. We're both still learning, still healing, but we do it together, remember? They sat there until full dark, holding each other. Then Clara built up the fire, lit the lamps, and made coffee strong enough to clear his head. As she worked, she told him about her trip misses, Henderson's shock, the gossip, her final words to Jake Morrison. You told him what? Jebediah stared at her in amazement. That he's a small, pathetic man. Clara grinned. Should have seen his face. Despite himself, Jebediah laughed. My fierce little wife, remind me never to cross you. You won't, she said simply, because you're nothing like him. Later, as they prepared for bed, Clara noticed the letter on the table, addressed to her, in Jebediah's careful hand. What's this? He flushed. Nothing, just, I thought you'd gone, and I wanted you to know. He shrugged. Doesn't matter now, but Clara opened it anyway. Reading by candlelight. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I was right. You came to your senses and left. I don't blame you. I want you to know that our weeks together were the happiest of my life since I lost them. You brought light back into my darkness. Whatever life you choose now, know that you are loved. You were never plain to me. You were everything. Forever you're devoted. Jebediah. Tears blurred her vision. She looked up at him, this strong, scarred man who'd been prepared to let her go because he thought it was best for her. You beautiful fool, she whispered. That night, she showed him with actions what words couldn't fully express, that she was his as surely as he was hers, that no town or society or comfortable life could tempt her from the home they were building together, that broken hearts could indeed mend and grow stronger at the mended places. Much later, as they lay entwined, Clara said softly, Promise me something. Anything. Next time you have doubts, talk to me. Don't sit here in the dark assuming the worst. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not used to having someone who stays. Well, get used to it. She kissed his chest, right over his heart. Because I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, two hearts beat as one, no longer afraid of the morning, no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. They'd chosen each other, not once in a moment of passion, not twice at a wedding ceremony, but again and again, in all the small moments that make a marriage. Clara's trunk sat by the door, unpacked. Tomorrow she'd find places for her treasures, blend her past with her present. Tonight, she simply held her husband and thanked whatever providence had sent her to this mountain, this man, this unexpected perfect life. In the distance, a wolf howled, not mournful this time, but triumphant, a song of survival, of pack, of home. Clara smiled and howled back, soft and playful, making Jebediah laugh against her hair. My wild mountain wife, he murmured. Your wife. She agreed, always your wife. And in the warmth of their bed, in the shelter of their cabin, in the certainty of their love, that was more than enough. It was everything. The simple ceremony took place at sunrise, 3 days after Clara's trip to Cedar Creek. They stood before the great pine that towered behind their cabin, its branches heavy with fresh snow. No preacher, no witnesses save for the mountains and sky, just two souls making promises that went deeper than any legal document. Jebediah had fashioned rings from silver dollars, hammering them smooth by candlelight while Clara slept. She'd sewn herself a new dress from fabric he'd surprised her with, soft blue wool that brought out the color in her eyes. I take you, Clara Mason Boone, he said, voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. As my wife before God and these mountains, I promise to protect you, provide for you, and cherish you until my last breath." Clara's hands trembled as she slipped the silver ring onto his finger. "I take you, Jebediah Boone, as my husband before God and all creation. I promise to stand beside you, comfort you, and love you through whatever comes." They'd written their own vows, simple and true. When they kissed, an eagle cried overhead, as if nature itself blessed their union. That afternoon, Jebediah surprised her again. "There's something I want to show you," he said, leading her to a section of the cabin she'd thought was just storage. He pulled aside a heavy curtain to reveal a small room she'd never seen, freshly cleaned, with a window cut to let in light. "Thought you might want a place of your own," he said gruffly. "For sewing or writing or just being." Clara's eyes filled with tears. A room of her own, something she'd never had, not in her parents' house or the boarding house. She threw her arms around him. "It's perfect. There's more." From a shelf, he pulled down a leather-bound journal and a set of pen and ink. "Noticed you looking at these in town. Thought you might want to keep accounts of things." She opened the journal, running her fingers over the blank pages. All her life, she'd wanted to write down her thoughts, but paper had been too precious, her time too occupied with others' needs. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing what I needed before I knew myself." That evening, she made her first entry. "Today I married my husband again, properly this time, with words we chose ourselves. He gave me a room and a journal, such simple gifts, but they mean more than all the fancy houses in Cedar Creek. I'm no longer plain Clara. I am Clara Boone, beloved wife, keeper of stories, mountain woman. I am finally who I was meant to be." Spring came slowly to Devil's Canyon, but Clara watched for its signs with anticipation. The first green shoots pushing through snow, the return of birdsong, the gradual lengthening of days. She started seeds in the windowsill, vegetables and herbs, but also flowers. Beauty matters too, she told Jebediah when he teased her about the impractical blooms. It was on a morning in early April when she knew for certain. She'd suspected for weeks, but the morning sickness confirmed it. She sat in her little room, hand pressed to her still flat belly, joy and terror warring in her chest. How to tell him? Would he be happy? Or would the memory of Lucy be too painful? She waited until evening, when they sat by the fire as was their custom. He was carving again. He'd been making furniture for the cabin, transforming it from mere shelter to true home. "Jebediah," she began, then stopped. How did one share such news? He looked up, instantly alert to her tone. "What is it? She took a breath. "Do you remember what you said about the cabin needing expansion?" "Of course, come summer. I thought we'd add—" He stopped, the carving knife going still. His eyes went to her face, searching. "Clara?" She nodded, tears spilling over. "October, I think. I'll know better when—" The carving clattered to the floor as he crossed to her, falling to his knees beside her chair. His hands hovered over her stomach, not quite touching. "Truly? Truly?" The joy that transformed his face took her breath away. But then, as she'd feared, shadows crept in. "Clara, what if I couldn't protect them before? What if—" She caught his hands, pressed them firmly to her belly. "This is not then. I am not Sarah. This child is not Lucy. This is our story. Jebediah, new and different and ours." He bent his head, pressing his forehead to their joined hands. She felt his shoulders shake and simply held him, understanding the complex tangle of grief and joy, fear and hope. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words muffled against her lap. "So am I," she confessed. "But we'll be scared together." The months that followed were a time of transformation. Jebediah threw himself into preparing for the baby with single-minded determination. He built a cradle from pine, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He added the promised room to the cabin, working from dawn to dusk. He traded furs for cloth and supplies, making multiple trips to Rock Springs despite his discomfort with town. Clara documented it all in her journal, along with the changes in her body, the movement of the child, the way Jebediah talked to her belly each night, promises of safety and love. She wrote about the garden she planted, coaxing life from the mountain soil, about the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows, about the pair of wolves they sometimes glimpsed at twilight, their old patient, they suspected, with a mate. One hot July day, a visitor arrived. Clara was hanging wash when she saw the figure laboring up the trail. A woman, alone, on foot. As she drew closer, Clara recognized her with shock. Mary Sullivan from the boarding house. But much changed. Her pretty face was gaunt, sporting a fading bruise on one cheek. Mary? Clara hurried forward, her rounded belly making her waddle slightly. What are you doing here? Mary's eyes went to Clara's obvious pregnancy, then to her face. I heard you were up here. I didn't know where else to go. The story came out over coffee and cornbread. Mary's husband, the charming traveling salesman who'd swept her off her feet, was a drunk and a gambler. He'd lost everything, then started using his fists when she complained. She'd run with only the clothes on her back. I remembered what you said, Mary whispered, about choosing your own path. I hoped. Of course you can stay, Clara said firmly, as long as you need. Jebediah, when he returned from hunting, was less welcoming. He stood rigid in the doorway, taking in the stranger at his table. Clara saw his walls going up, the instinct to protect their sanctuary from outsiders. She needs help, Clara said simply, like I did. Their eyes met across the room. After a long moment, he nodded. The barn's sturdy enough. We'll fix it up for her. Mary stayed through the summer, helping with the garden, learning to live simply. She was shocked by the primitive conditions at first, but gradually found peace in the routine of mountain life. Clara watched her transform from frightened town mouse to capable woman, and felt deep satisfaction. You're different, Mary said one August evening as they snapped beans for dinner. Not just the baby, you're luminous. Clara smiled. I'm loved, properly loved. It changes everything. He's nothing like what they said in town. The hermit, he's gentle with you. He's himself. Clara said, that's all anyone can be, given the chance. When Mary finally left in September, stronger and determined to make her own way in California, she hugged Clara tight. Thank you for showing me it could be different. October arrived with golden aspens and crisp air. Clara was hanging the last of the baby clothes she'd sewn when the first pain hit. She gripped the clothesline, breathing through it. They'd been coming all morning, but this was different, stronger. Jebediah, she called, voice steady despite her fear. He was at her side in an instant. Is it time? She nodded, then gasped as another contraction rolled through her. I think, yes. What followed was the longest night of both their lives. Jebediah had delivered calves and foals, but this was different. This was Clara. This was their child. He boiled water, tore clean cloths, tried to remember everything the midwife had told them on their last trip to town. Clara labored with the same quiet strength she brought to everything. When the pain grew overwhelming, she gripped his hands and met his eyes, drawing courage from his presence. He talked her through each wave, told her she was brave, beautiful, strong. I can't, she gasped at one point, exhausted and afraid. You can, he said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. You saved me. Clara, you can do this. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky pink and gold, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to both their eyes. Jebediah caught him with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect fingers, the shock of dark hair. A boy, he whispered, placing the baby on Clara's chest. A perfect boy. Clara looked down at their son, then up at her husband, seeing the same awe reflected in his eyes. What should we call him? Jebediah was quiet for a long moment, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. Samuel, he said finally. It means God has heard, because I prayed for redemption, and God sent me you. Both of you. Samuel Boone, Clara murmured. Sam, it's perfect. They lay together in their bed, the baby between them, watching the sun rise on their new life as a family. Outside, they heard it, a long, triumphant howl, answered by another, the wolves, celebrating with them. Our guardians, Clara said sleepily. Our witnesses. Jebediah agreed. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then to Sam's downy head. My family? Clara wrote in her journal later. When both father and son slept. Today I became a mother. Today Jebediah became a father again. Today our cabin became fuller than any mansion. We who were broken are now whole. We who were lost are now found. The man who thought he could never protect another soul held his son with hands as gentle as swan's down. The woman they called plain has never felt more beautiful. God does indeed work in mysterious ways, sending a cruel joke that became a love story, turning a tragedy into triumph. I am Clara Boone, wife, mother, keeper of this small paradise. I am exactly where I belong. The fire came in late summer, when Samuel was 3 years old. Clara first noticed the smoke on the horizon while picking berries with her son. His chubby hands stained purple from their harvest. The western sky had turned an ominous orange-gray, and the wind carried the acrid smell of burning pine. Fire, Mama? Sam asked, pointing with sticky fingers. Yes, sweetheart. We need to find Papa. Jebediah was already racing back from the high meadow when they met on the trail. His face was grim. Lightning strike up on Eagle Ridge, winds pushing it this way. They had perhaps hours, maybe less. Clara's heart pounded as she looked at their cabin, their carefully tended garden, the life they'd built over 4 years. But Jebediah was already moving, thinking, planning. The creek, he said. If we can get across to the north side, the water might stop it. They worked with desperate efficiency. Clara bundled their most precious possessions, her journal, the daguerreotype of Sarah and Lucy that Jebediah had finally felt able to display again, Sam's baby blanket, important papers. Jebediah loaded the horses with supplies, tools, whatever they could carry. The smoke grew thicker, and they could hear the fire now, a distant roar like a waterfall. Forest creatures fled past them. Deer, rabbits, even a black bear with cubs, all running from the common enemy. Go, Jebediah urged, lifting Sam onto the horse in front of Clara. Get across the creek. I'll soak down the cabin. Try to save what— No! Clara's voice was steel. We go together or not at all. Their eyes met. He knew that tone, knew better than to argue. They worked side by side, soaking blankets in the rain barrel, beating at spot fires that sparked from floating embers. But the main fire was coming too fast, too hot. Now! Jebediah shouted over the roar. We go now! They rode hard for the creek. Sam clutched tight in Clara's arms. Behind them, the fire crested the ridge like a living thing, orange and terrible. The horses splashed through the water, scrambling up the far bank just as the flames reached their garden. From the safety of the north bank, they watched their home burn. The cabin Jebediah had built expanded, filled with a love consumed in minutes. Clara wept silently, one hand on Sam's head as he buried his face in her chest, the other gripping Jebediah's hand. Our home, she whispered. No, Jebediah said firmly. He put his arm around them both, pulling them close. This is our home, you and Sam. Everything else is just wood and stone. They camped by the creek that night, watching the fire burn itself out against the natural barrier of water and rocks. By dawn, the mountains wore a coat of ash and char. Their cabin was a skeleton of blackened logs. But as they picked through the ruins, miracles emerged. The root cellar had survived, preserving most of their food stores. The stone chimney stood firm, and there, barely scorched in what had been Clara's writing room, her journal lay protected by the fallen beam that had shielded it. We rebuild, Clara said, not a question but a statement. We rebuild. Jebediah agreed. Word of the fire reached Rock Springs, and what happened next stunned them both. People came, first a trickle, then a stream. Elijah, the wagon driver, brought lumber. Reverend Campbell arrived with a work crew from his congregation, even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house sent supplies with a note. For Clara, who showed us all what courage looks like. Most shocking was when the Shoshone band from the North Valley appeared, led by an elder named Joseph Crow Feather. Jebediah had helped them through a hard winter 2 years back, sharing meat when their hunters came back empty-handed. "You helped us," Joseph said simply. "Now we help you." For 2 weeks, their mountain sanctuary became a hive of activity. The cabin rose again, stronger than before, with willing hands making quick work. Clara cooked for the workers, Sam toddling around helping by carrying single nails to the builders. Jebediah struggled at first with so many people in his space, old instincts making him withdraw. But Clara watched him slowly relax, even laugh when Sam decided Joseph's long braids were perfect for playing. Community. Clara wrote in her salvage journal, "We thought we were building a life apart from the world, but the world came to us when we needed it. Perhaps isolation isn't strength. Perhaps true strength is letting others in." Jake Morrison even appeared one day, without his usual cronies, carrying a box of window glass. He couldn't meet their eyes, just set down his burden and muttered, "Heard you needed these." He left before they could thank him, but Clara saw something in his face. Shame. Maybe, or the beginning of change. When the cabin was complete larger now, with proper rooms and real glass windows, they held a celebration. Tables made from sawhorses and planks groaned under the weight of food. Elijah played his fiddle. Children ran between the adults' legs, Sam leading a pack of them in some invented game, as the sun set, painting the recovering mountains in gentle light. Reverend Campbell called for silence. "I've seen something remarkable here," he said. "A man and woman who folks said didn't belong together, building a life that's touched us all. They've shown us that kindness breeds kindness, that judgment is often wrong, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places." He raised his cup of cider. "To Jebediah and Clara Boone, may their rebuilt home stand as strong as their marriage." The toast echoed across the clearing. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks as their neighbors, for that's what these people had become, cheered their health later, after the guests had gone. The little family sat on their new porch, watching stars appear in the clear mountain sky. Sam dozed in Jebediah's lap, worn out from the day's excitement. "They called us an unlikely match," Clara said softly. "We were," Jebediah replied. "A broken hermit and a woman the world called plain. Who would have thought? God, apparently." Clara smiled. "And whoever wrote that letter?" They'd never learned who actually penned the fake mail-order bride letter. Jake had admitted his group sent Clara's picture, but someone else had written the words that brought her to the mountain. A mystery that no longer mattered. "Do you ever wonder how life would have been if that letter hadn't come?" Jebediah asked. Clara considered. "You'd still be alone up here. I'd still be plain Clara, scrubbing floors in Cedar Creek. Sam wouldn't exist. Mary would never have found the courage to leave." She shook her head. "I can't imagine it." "Neither can I." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "That cruel joke became our salvation." A wolf howled in the distance. Their old friend, they liked to think, whose pack still roamed the high country. Other voices joined it, a wild chorus that seemed to bless the rebuilt home and the family within it. "Listen to them," Clara murmured. "Singing for us. Singing for home," Jebediah corrected. "For pack, for belonging." Sam stirred, opening sleepy eyes. "Wolves, Papa?" "Yes, son, telling the world they're alive. Like us?" the little boy asked with 3-year-old wisdom. Jebediah and Clara exchanged glances over his head, marvel in their eyes at this child who'd grown up knowing only love, only acceptance, only belonging. "Yes," Clara said, smoothing her son's dark hair. "Exactly like us." They sat there as the moon rose. 3 souls who'd found each other against all odds. The cabin behind them stood strong and new, but it was just wood and stone. The real home was there on the porch, in joined hands, in sleeping child. in hearts that had learned to trust again. Clara thought about the woman she'd been. Plain Clara, unwanted and unseen. That woman was gone, transformed by mountain air and unexpected love. In her place sat Clara Boone, wife, mother, keeper of stories, friend to wolves and wounded hearts. A woman who'd learned that beauty isn't in perfect features, but in the courage to be seen, to be known, to be loved. "I should put Sam to bed," she said, but made no move to rise. "In a moment." Jebediah agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell. So they sat a while longer, their rebuilt home solid at their backs, their rebuilt lives solid beneath them, listening to the wolves sing of survival and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did in the mountains. But tonight, they were simply grateful for cruel jokes that become blessings, for broken people who find wholeness together, for the family they'd made and the community they'd discovered, for second chances and third chances and all the chances that come after. In her journal, Clara would write, "They sent me here as a jest, thinking to humiliate a plain woman and a hermit man. Instead, they gave us everything. In trying to be cruel, they were kind. In meaning to mock, they created a love story. God does indeed write straight with crooked lines, and I'm grateful for every twist in the path that brought me home." The wolves sang on, and the mountains listened, and the little family on the porch added their own silent song of thanksgiving to the night. Thank you all for listening to this tale of Clara and Jebediah, a story that reminds us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. If you're enjoying this story from the Wild West Campfire, we'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's during a long drive, a quiet evening at home, or somewhere in between. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of courage, redemption, and romance from the American frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What touched your heart in Clara and Jebediah's journey? Until we meet again around the campfire, may your own trails lead to unexpected blessings.